As a part of the HEA initiatives Get to Know Women from around the world, today we're going to be meeting a woman from the Nazi times. Please introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Anna Einhaus. I'm a once Aryan woman under the Nazi rule. Fortunately, I survived the sexist and racist ideologies of that time, and I live today to aid people like Bock and Combs and Elizabeth Hyman, female historians, to write about how women were treated at that time and put in my personal experiences in such writings.
So you talk about mainly Aryans.
Well, a lot of people would think that because I was an Aryan woman, but fortunately for me, I wasn't that young at that time of the Nazis, so I got the chance to see people like Irina Sendler, this woman who helped a lot of non-Aryans and Jews, especially when Poland was invaded by the Nazis in 1939. She helped them get fake IDs and residences. So I got a taste or got a view of how non-Aryans were treated, women, children, and men. And let me be honest, the treatment was very distinct from each other. It was very different. But one thing we need to highlight in the issue of how women were treated in the Nazis, it was such a controversial way of treatment. I mean, Hitler came out in 1933 when the Nazis took control and said no woman was allowed to work. But then in 1939, when they invaded Poland and the economy was going to collapse because there were no men at home to work, he said, well, Aryan women can start working now. And then when they found out that Aryan women were not enough to get the economy back going, they said all women can work now. For that time, of course, just that time. But so you see, so we can't really touch all bases under that topic, but we shall try, of course.
Alright, so let's start with something like education, for instance.
Well, education was very distinct between boys and girls, especially under the Hitler control. Boys were taught to be soldiers, violence, and how to hold a gun. And women, on the other hand, were taught things like domestic skills, how to be housewives and mothers and wives. In 1933, things like Latin and sciences were removed from the girls' schools, and they were started to be taught in things like domestic skills and the German language. Women were expected to grow up as baby machines to just give babies. Hitler wanted babies, pure race. So they weren't taught to be ambitious and have dreams. And that was evident when we see the statistics, and only 1% of the professors were females at that point, which shows the lack of education. A very important part of the important aspect of the education was the Hitler Youth Group. Both girls and boys were admitted into that group to be taught about the Nazi ideologies. I was too old, but my neighbor was in it, and she was a blonde. She loved it, and she said that the thing she loved the most was the uniform. It was so pretty and neat, and she was a blonde, and they venerated blondes greatly. So yeah, so basically education was domestic skills, no ambitions.
Again, I think you've already mentioned it, but what about the rights for women to work?
I did mention it before how women were expected to just grow without ambitions. But let's just say that women were divided into Aryans, non-Aryans, and single women. The Nazi rule really did divide women into those segments. Aryan women were allowed to work if they're not married. So single women, because you're an Aryan single woman, I'm gonna use you. You're not giving me babies? Well, work for me. Work for the Nazi agencies, the Nazi administrations. And if you're a single woman, also you have the privilege of, if you don't want to get married, you can have a baby outside of the wedlock, and that would be okay under the Nazi ideologies. They accepted that. They just wanted babies, as I said. On the other hand, non-Aryan women were not allowed to work at all, especially if you're a Jew. Jews, both men, women, and children, were denied all rights for education, for working, for having a say in the country. So, just to sum it up, Aryan women, you're not allowed to work if you have a house. This is like your main priority, being a housewife and a mother. If you're a single Aryan woman, you're allowed to work in the Nazi organization. If you're a non-Aryan, you're not allowed to work, especially if you're a Jew. No work, no rights, nothing. Oh, and I forgot to mention, in 1934, there was this new rule where you had a year of duty. If you're an Aryan like myself, I'm a single woman. I was an Aryan single woman. In 1934, I was behooved to work for a year under the Nazi government, and that year was later extended to about approximately 5 years. So the year of duty was something that each and every single Aryan woman had to do.
A topic everyone is interested in is the abortion and motherhood.
Well, as I said, there were two distinct groups, the Aryans and non-Aryans, married women. Aryans were encouraged to have kids. People who had, or women who had more than 8 kids actually received medals. So it was kind of a competition, and women actually wanted to have kids, as many kids as possible. On the other hand, non-Aryans were forced to abort and be sterilized. Between 1933 and 1939, over 320,000 people, non-Aryans, were sterilized, which is a huge number. So you see the contrast. Women were treated really differently, and today historians argue that the Hitler rule actually divided women because of that.
Well, definitely they were treated differently, as you can see.
Exactly, and I just want to say at the end that until today, we see the effect of the Nazis' box of how women should be. I mean, just a couple of years ago in 1953, the Minister of Family Affairs,
Wasn't it Franz Joseph Felmering?
exactly that guy, he came out and said that he appreciates the idea of a traditional view of women as housewives and wives and mothers. And he did believe in the idea of church, children, and kitchen. And that guy didn't leave office until 5 years ago, 1962. So women are seeing the effects and still, I believe, in my opinion, victims of the Nazis' ideologies and idea of how women are. But of course, that's just my opinion.
Thank you for your time. If you're interested in what you just heard, I would recommend reading about Koons and Bach's works, which worked closely with Anna. We'll see you next week with a new guest on Hayat Doman's initiatives.